to change the dynamics. When his dad had come at him for some perceived infraction a few days before, fist clenched, Sam, almost as a reflex, had backed him up against the kitchen wall with a hand to his throat. The sheer surprise had been enough to disconnect his father's rage. He'd even noticed a small flicker of fear in his dad's eyes. But what Sam knew all too well was that it wouldn't end there. At times he felt the only way the war between them would ever end was if he killed his dad, or his dad killed him. Sam stood by the front window for a few seconds, looking up at the sky, seeing the first rays of morning light. He had to get going. But as he was about to open the front door, he stopped and turned back to the stairs, sure that he'd heard the floor creak. He gave it a full minute before he slipped out and ran across the street. Hiding behind a tree, he watched the window shade on the second-floor landing slowly rise. He couldn't make out the dark silhouette behind it, but it had to be his father. And that pissed him off. On this day of all days, when his life was at a crossroads, his father wasn't going to dictate what he could and couldn't do. Hoisting up his backpack, Sam took off at a dead run toward Victory Park and the woods beyond. Chapter 1. Present day, Castle Lake, Minnesota. Sergeant Dave Tamborski, one of Castle Lake's finest, pulled his black-and-white police cruiser into a parking space in front of Rowdy's Hamburger Shack. It was 11 in the morning, and the temperature was already in the mid-90s, a ridiculously hot day for late September. It might be kind of early for lunch, but Dave hadn't eaten any breakfast because he'd been called in early to work. He often stopped by Rowdy's because the couple who owned the place never charged him. Several years ago, he'd been the one to find their missing dog, Buttercup. He'd discovered the little bichon by the side of the highway and rushed her to a local vet, thus saving her life. He'd just been doing his job, of course, but wasn't about to turn down free food. Ordering a bacon cheeseburger, fries, and an ice-cold root beer, his usual, he climbed back into the front seat and drove slowly through town. His chief, Grady Larson, made it clear that none of his officers were supposed to eat while behind the wheel, but since Dave was a detective sergeant, one of only 2 on the police force, and a man with a love-hate relationship with rules, he sometimes ignored the instruction. As he drove down Main, he nodded to the people he knew, which was just about everyone. Dave had grown up in Castle Lake. His father, Mitch Tamborski, had served as the town's police chief for 16 years. From the time he was a little kid, Dave knew he wanted to be a cop. For one thing, he idolized his dad, thought he was the coolest, bravest, most honorable guy on earth. Beyond that, he liked being an authority figure. He also liked, much to the surprise of his younger self, helping people. After high school, Dave was accepted into the law enforcement program at Hibbing Community College. His aunt lived in Hibbing, so he'd stayed with her while he was in school. After graduation, he'd taken a position with the Fergus Falls PD and was finally hired by the police department in Castle Lake 3 years later. The best part for Dave was the sense that he'd made his dad proud. Turning off Main, Dave polished off the last of the fries as he drove past Grace Lutheran. It was a newer church, mostly one story except for the sanctuary part. It was nothing like Holy Trinity, the Catholic church 2 blocks farther east, with its red and tan patterned brick, clock tower, and Gothic spires. In Dave's opinion, a church should be both beautiful and imposing. It shouldn't look like a bank. Castle Lake, with a population of some 4,200 mainly upstanding souls, had 17 churches of various denominations. While Dave's father was a firm believer in God, he'd never been interested in organized religion. He'd passed his distaste on to his children. Dave was a nominal member of Mount Olive Presbyterian. In a small town like Castle Lake, church-going, for anyone in the public eye, was more or less expected. If Dave had a weakness, it was his image. He wanted to be seen as a decent, fair, honest guy, so he went to church. Not with any regularity, but he did show up for Sunday services every now and then, enough to look the part of the God-fearing citizen. Driving past Holy Trinity a few minutes later, Dave pulled into the rear parking lot to take a look at the graveyard, which stretched all the way to the wooded area south of town. It was the largest and oldest graveyard in Castle Lake, a place where teenagers, much to the displeasure of the priests,